There was a guy in 1960 who worked at a Ford plant in Detroit, made decent money, owned a house, had 2 kids, took a vacation every summer. His wife didn't work. They weren't rich, but they were absolutely, undeniably fine. That word fine meant something specific back then. It meant security. It meant the math worked. Now fast forward to today. That same lifestyle, 1 house, 2 kids, 1 vacation a year, requires a household income of over $300,000 in most major American cities. And the people making $80,000, $90,000, even $120,000 a year aren't living that 1,960 life. They're working twice as hard, commuting longer, sleeping less, skipping the vacation, and still somehow ending every month with nothing left over. They're not poor, but they're not fine either. They're stuck in something that has no name but is eating them alive. I'm going to call it the middle class trap, and I'm going to show you exactly how it works, why it's getting worse, and the specific mechanism that keeps intelligent, hardworking people locked inside it for their entire lives. Because the trap isn't what you think it is. It's not laziness. It's not overspending on lattes. It's a structural system designed to extract the maximum amount of your income and time while leaving you just comfortable enough to not revolt. Here's what we're actually doing today. I'm going to show you the 3 invisible taxes that nobody calls taxes, but that are quietly consuming your financial life. I'll break down why the advice to just budget better is not only wrong, but actively harmful to most people trying to escape. I'll explain the consumption identity trap, the psychological mechanism that makes people spend money they don't have to feel like the person they think they should be. And I'll walk you through what the math actually looks like when you run it, honestly. Not the way your financial planner runs it, the way someone who actually wants you free would run it. I built a free financial pressure calculator because most budgeting tools are designed by banks and are mathematically optimistic in ways that serve the bank, not you. It uses the same actuarial logic that insurance companies use to calculate real financial exposure. Link in the description. I only ask for your email to send the report. I don't store your data. Let me start with a metaphor that's going to reframe everything. Think of your financial life like a boat. You've got an engine, that's your income. You've got a destination, that's your goals, retirement, financial freedom, whatever you're aiming for. And you've got holes in the hull. Now, most financial advice focuses on the engine. Get a better job, earn more, side hustle, grind harder, which is fine. But if you've got 3 massive holes in the hull, it doesn't matter how powerful the engine is. You're bailing water instead of moving forward. The middle class trap isn't an income problem. For most people, it's a structural leak problem. And until you understand what the leaks actually are, not the surface level ones everyone talks about, but the real systemic ones, you'll keep bailing and wondering why you're not getting anywhere. Let's start with the first invisible tax, which I call the convenience premium. And it's bigger than you think. In 1970, the average American household spent about 30% of its income on housing. Food was around 15%. Transportation was maybe 10%. Everything else, clothing, entertainment, healthcare, split the remaining 45%. Now, these numbers have completely exploded in specific categories, while others compressed. Housing in major metro areas is routinely 40 to 50% of take-home pay for middle-income households. Healthcare costs have risen faster than inflation for 40 consecutive years. Childcare, which barely existed as a line item in 1970 because one parent usually stayed home, now costs more than in-state college tuition in 28 states. That's not a spending problem. That's a structural cost explosion that happened over 5 decades while wages grew at maybe a third of that pace. But here's the part that makes it worse. As the structural costs got heavier, the economy also got really good at monetizing the gaps. You're exhausted from working 2 incomes to afford the house and the childcare, so you order DoorDash instead of cooking. You're stressed about money, so you subscribe to Netflix and Disney Plus and HBO and Spotify because entertainment is cheap relative to everything else, and it feels like a reward for surviving the week. You don't have time to shop around for better car insurance because you're working 50 hours to cover the mortgage, so you auto-renew and they hike it 12% and you barely notice. Every gap created by working more and having less time gets filled by a convenient, relatively affordable service that extracts a small amount monthly. Individually, none of these amounts feel significant. Collectively, they create what researchers call the convenience tax, the premium you pay to manage a lifestyle that's too busy and too expensive to manage without paying premiums, and it compounds. The convenience tax isn't $15 a month for Netflix. It's the entire ecosystem of small recurring costs that appear because you have no slack in your schedule to do things the cheaper way. I did a rough calculation once. The average American household with 2 working adults spends somewhere between $800 and $1,400 per month on services and subscriptions that didn't exist in any meaningful form in 1990. Streaming services, food delivery, meal kits, app subscriptions, cloud storage, premium everything, extended warranties on things that used to just get fixed. $1,200 a month is $14,400 a year. At a 7% return, that's $960,000 of compounding wealth destroyed over 30 years. Not from luxury spending, from convenience, from being too busy and too tired to do things the slow way. Now here's the second invisible tax, and this one is more psychologically uncomfortable. I'm going to call it the credential trap. Here's how it works. You go to college partly because you want to, partly because every authority figure in your life told you it was the only path to a good life. You take out $40,000, $60,000, $80,000 in loans. You graduate. You get a job that pays reasonably well, let's say $55,000 to start. But now you're spending $400 to $600 a month on student loans, which is money you cannot invest, cannot save, cannot use to build wealth. It's gone. Pre-spent on a credential you needed to get in the door. Now here's what makes it a trap rather than just a cost. The credential economy keeps escalating. 20 years ago, a bachelor's degree was a differentiator. Now it's a floor. So the people who want to stand out get master's degrees, which cost more and take more time, and then MBAs, and then certifications, and then professional licenses. Each credential is a bet that the income increase justifies the cost. Sometimes it does. Often it doesn't. A teacher with a master's degree required by her district earns maybe $3,000 more per year. If that degree cost $40,000, she needs 13 years just to break even on the investment, not counting the years of compounding that $40,000 would have done sitting in an index fund. She's been told the credential is an investment. It's actually a consumption purchase with a credential attached. I'm not saying education is worthless. I'm saying the relationship between credential cost and income return has broken down catastrophically in the last 30 years. And nobody in the education industry has any incentive to tell you that because they collect the tuition regardless of the outcome. The credential trap is particularly vicious for the middle class because it's sold as the solution to being middle class. Get more credentials and you'll earn more. But if the credential costs more than the income increase it generates over a reasonable time horizon, you're not climbing. You're running in place on a more expensive treadmill. And this doesn't only apply to formal education. It applies to professional development, to the pressure to have the right LinkedIn certifications, the right software skills, the right MBA network. There's an entire industry built on the anxiety of middle-class professionals who feel like they're one credential away from financial security. That industry is not aligned with your financial freedom. It's aligned with selling you the next course, the next certification, the next thing you need to be competitive. Here's the third invisible tax, and it's the biggest one. I call it the identity consumption loop. And understanding this one is the key to everything. In 1950, if you wanted your neighbors to know you were doing well, you bought a house in a nice neighborhood, you drove a decent car, and maybe you had a color television. The signals of middle-class success were limited, expensive, and slow to update. You couldn't really perform prosperity on a daily basis because there was no medium for it. You couldn't broadcast what you ate for breakfast, or what hotel you stayed at, or which wine you preferred. Now here's what changed. Social media didn't just give people a platform. It turned identity into a performance, and performance requires props, and props cost money. I want to be careful here because I don't think most people are consciously trying to impress strangers on Instagram. The psychology is subtler and more insidious than that. What happens is that you absorb identity signals from your environment. The people you follow, the shows you watch, the neighborhood you live in, the colleagues you lunch with, they all transmit information about what a successful, good, interesting person looks like. And that transmitted image becomes the baseline for how you evaluate your own life. You're not consciously thinking, I need that kitchen renovation to impress people. You're thinking, my kitchen feels old and cramped and I deserve better. But the feeling that you deserve better is not coming from inside you on some pure existential level. It's coming from thousands of hours of content that has been specifically designed to make you feel like your current situation is inadequate. Marketers have a term for this. They call it aspirational targeting. You show people the life they want, then sell them the gap between where they are and that life. The genius of modern consumer capitalism is that it has made the gap infinite. There is always a better version of what you have, always a newer model, always a nicer neighborhood, always a more impressive vacation. And as long as the gap exists, consumption never stops. Now connect this to the middle class. The middle class is particularly vulnerable to the identity consumption loop because they have just enough money to participate in aspirational consumption, but not enough to win the status game outright. A billionaire doesn't need to perform wealth, they just are wealthy. Their status is secure regardless of which car they drive. But someone making $90,000 in a city where their colleagues make $150,000, they feel the gap every day. And the temptation to bridge that gap through consumption is constant and expensive. The guy who buys the BMW he can barely afford isn't stupid. He's responding rationally to a social signal that says the BMW matters in his environment. The problem is that the BMW purchase is a monthly extraction machine. It doesn't generate returns. It depreciates. It increases insurance costs. It signals success while systematically preventing the accumulation of actual wealth. And this is the core mechanism of the trap. The things that make you look like you're doing well financially are mostly the same things that prevent you from actually doing well financially. The house that's 40% of your take-home pay. The car that signals success. The vacations you document. The restaurants you post about. These are not neutral choices. They are consumption decisions that are in direct competition with investment decisions. Every dollar that goes to signaling is a dollar that doesn't compound. And the compounding math is brutal. Let me show you. Two people, same income, $90,000 a year. Person A spends $1,500 a month on consumption, signaling the nice car, the dining out budget, the vacations, the apartment upgrade, the clothes. Person B drives a used car, cooks most meals, takes modest trips, invests that $1,500 instead. Over 30 years at 7% returns, that $1,500 a month difference becomes $1.8 million. Not because person B earned more, because person B opted out of the identity consumption loop and let time and compounding do the heavy lifting. Person A at 65 has nothing. Person B at 65 has options. Same income, same intelligence, radically different outcome. The difference wasn't discipline, it was philosophy. Person B decided early on that they were playing the compounding game, not the status game. And once you make that decision clearly and consciously, a lot of the temptation temptations start to lose their pull. Let me tell you about a woman I know. She's a marketing director at a mid-sized company, makes $105,000, lives in a one-bedroom apartment she's been in for 6 years, drives a Honda Civic. Her colleagues who make similar salaries live in two-bedroom apartments, drive German cars, take at least 2 international trips a year, and go out 4 or 5 nights a week. She goes out once or twice. She invested the difference. By 43, she had $620,000 in her brokerage and retirement accounts combined. Her colleagues have nice Instagram grids and $40,000 in their 401ks. She could take a 50% pay cut tomorrow and be completely fine. Her colleagues would be in crisis within 2 months. Who's actually winning? Not the people who look like they're winning. The people who are quietly, invisibly, boringly compounding. Here's where the conventional financial advice fails almost everyone, and this is important to understand. The standard advice goes like this: budget your spending, cut the lattes, automate your savings, pay off debt, invest the rest. And all of that is technically correct, but it treats financial behavior as a knowledge problem. People aren't investing because they don't know how, and that's just not true. The information about index funds, about compound interest, about the 4% rule that's freely available has been for decades, and most people with a high school education can understand it in an afternoon. The problem isn't knowledge. The problem is that humans don't make financial decisions based on logic. They make them based on emotion, identity, social context, and the relentless pressure of a consumer economy that is specifically engineered to extract money from them at every touch point. Telling someone to just budget better when they're caught in the identity consumption loop is like telling someone with a broken leg to just walk it off. The advice is not wrong in the abstract. It's just useless in the specific context of the actual problem. What actually works is restructuring your environment so that the good financial behaviors are the default and the bad ones require active effort. Let me give you the mechanics of that because it's not as complicated as it sounds. The first lever is what behavioral economists call commitment devices. You make the decision once under calm conditions and then take future you out of the equation. Automate your investment contributions before the paycheck hits your checking account, not after, before. If you never see the money, you cannot spend it, you cannot rationalize it, you cannot be tempted by it. Future you will thank past you constantly. Second lever is friction engineering. Make the thing you don't want to do harder. Delete the DoorDash app. You don't have to never use it. You just have to make it require a conscious decision to download it again each time. Cancel the auto renewal on subscriptions and force yourself to manually resubscribe. You'll be shocked how many you just don't bother with. Remove your credit card from autofill on shopping sites. These small amounts of friction don't prevent spending. They interrupt the automatic behavior long enough for the rational brain to weigh in. And a lot of the time, the rational brain doesn't want to order the thing that badly. Third lever is identity recalibration. This one is the hardest and the most important. You need to consciously decide who you are in relationship to money before the consumer economy decides for you, because it will decide for you if you let it. The default identity that consumer culture offers is you are what you own, you are where you go, you are what you display. And if you haven't explicitly rejected that identity and replaced it with something else, you will spend your life performing it at enormous cost. What does the replacement look like? Different for everyone, but the common thread is build identity around what you build, not what you buy. The investor is building something. The person who pays off debt is building something. The person who maxes their 401k and invests the rest in index funds is building something invisible, unimpressive at dinner parties, completely boring to post about, and something that in 20 years will give them a level of freedom that no amount of consumer signaling ever could. Here's a thought experiment I find useful. Imagine 2 versions of yourself at 60. Version A has a closet full of expensive clothes that went out of style, a storage unit full of furniture from several apartment upgrades, memories of nice dinners and international trips that have faded into a general blur of pleasant experiences, and about $80,000 in retirement savings because the spending kept pace with the earning and there was never really a surplus. Version B has been driving boring cars and cooking at home for 20 years. Version B's house is fine but not impressive. Their clothes are functional. Their social media posts are infrequent and unremarkable. And version B has $900,000 in investments that throw off $60,000 a year. Version B gets up on a Tuesday morning and decides whether to work today or go for a walk because the money doesn't care. Which version would you rather be? Not which version looks better in your 30s. Which version would you rather actually be at 60? The answer for almost everyone is version B, but they're living version A because the system makes version A feel like success in real time. And version B feels like sacrifice in real time. Now let me show you the math more precisely because I think most people dramatically underestimate how much money they're talking about. Let's run a specific scenario. Alex is 28 years old, makes $70,000 a year. Take home after taxes is roughly $52,000. Standard middle class life in a mid-sized city means rent of around $1,400 a month, car payment of $350, insurance, utilities, groceries, phone, internet, let's call that another $600. That's $2,350 in hard necessities, which leaves about $1,980 per month after basic fixed costs. Now here's the fork in the road. Option 1, Alex spends the $1,980 in ways that improve his daily quality of life. Nicer apartment, better car, regular dining out, subscriptions, a couple of trips a year. These purchases are real. They provide genuine enjoyment and they're completely destroying his long-term financial position. Option 2, Alex invests $1,200 of that $1,000 $1,980 and lives on the remaining $780 for discretionary spending. That's still money for fun. It's just a different priority hierarchy. At 7% annual returns, $1,200 a month over 30 years is $1.36 million. If Alex gets modest raises and increases contributions as income grows, you're looking at over $2 million by age 58. Alex could retire at 58 or 55 or 53 depending on how aggressively he scales up contributions with genuine financial independence. Or Alex spends the $1,980 on experience and consumption and retires at 68 with whatever's left in Social Security, plus maybe $150,000 in a 401k he underfunded. Same income, same basic human, same 30 years of working. Wildly, catastrophically different outcome. And here's the part that breaks people when they really sit with it. Alex in option 1 isn't even happier during those 30 years. Research on hedonic adaptation, the human tendency to return to a relatively stable level of happiness, regardless of positive or negative changes in circumstance, is overwhelming. You upgrade the apartment, feel great for 2 months, and then the new apartment is just the apartment. You buy the nicer car, love it for 6 months, and then it's just the car. The upgrade cycle generates temporary pleasure and then returns to baseline while permanently extracting the financial cost. Alex in option 2 doesn't suffer those 30 years because he drives a Honda and lives in a modest apartment. He adjusted, adapted, built identity around things that don't cost money, and lived a genuinely good life. Just a different looking one. This is the behavioral science piece that the financial industry conveniently ignores because it doesn't sell anything. You don't need more stuff to be happy. You've probably already noticed this if you're honest with yourself. The things that actually make you feel good: deep relationships, meaningful work, health, freedom, autonomy, none of them require the BMW payment. Now let me bring it back to the bigger structural picture because I don't want this to feel like pure personal responsibility bootstrapping, because it isn't. The middle class trap is structural. The cost of housing has been driven up by decades of policy choices around zoning and interest rates and institutional investors entering the single family housing market. Healthcare costs exploding isn't your fault. Student loan debt being a prerequisite for many careers isn't your fault. Real wage stagnation isn't your fault. These are systemic forces that are genuinely squeezing people and that require policy responses, not just personal virtue. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You cannot wait for the system to fix itself. That might take decades, might never happen, might get worse before it gets better. And while you're waiting, your 30s become your 40s, and your 40s become your 50s, and the compounding window is closing. So you have to work both levers simultaneously. You advocate for systemic change because it matters, and because you live in a society with other people who deserve better too. And you also take the personal actions within your control right now, because waiting for the system to save you is not a retirement plan. Here's what I find most people actually need: not more information, but a new frame. Because the old frame, work hard, buy the things, hope it works out, is failing most people, and failing quietly enough that they don't realize it until it's too late. The new frame looks like this. Your monthly spending decisions are not just consumption choices. They are votes for which version of your future self gets funded. Every dollar that goes to signaling instead of compounding is a vote for version A at 60, the one with great memories and an empty portfolio. Every dollar that gets automated into an index fund is a vote for version B, the one with options. And you vote every single month in every billing cycle, every time you open DoorDash or scroll Amazon or decide whether to take on another car payment. Now let me get specific about what I'd actually do if I were 28 right now, starting from scratch in today's environment, because the environment is legitimately harder than it was 20 years ago. And generic advice that worked in 2005 isn't necessarily the right playbook now. Step 1, I would get ruthlessly honest about my real number, not my gross income, my actual take home after taxes. Then I'd subtract fixed, non-negotiable costs: rent, utilities, insurance, phone, minimum debt payments. Whatever's left is the battlefield. That number determines how fast I can move. And if that number is small or negative, my first priority is engineering it to be positive, not through magic, but through specific, uncomfortable choices about where I live, what I drive, and what I owe. Step 2, I would automate 20% of take home into investments before doing anything else, not what's left over after living, the first 20%. If that means my lifestyle budget is tight, the lifestyle adjusts, not the investment. You cannot negotiate with compound interest. It rewards consistency over everything else. The person who invests $500 a month for 30 years will have more money than the person who invests nothing for 20 years and then $2,000 a month for 10 years. Time is the asset. Protecting time in the market is the priority. Step 3, I would get genuinely clear on my identity outside of consumption. This sounds like therapy talk, and it kind of is, but it's also practical. Because until you figure out what you actually value, not what you've absorbed that you should value, you'll keep spending money on things that don't actually make you happy, trying to fill a gap that isn't financial. Most people who figure this out describe the same experience. They stop buying things for a while, either by choice or necessity. They discover that a lot of what they were spending on was filling boredom or anxiety or comparison, and they realize that a simpler life is not a lesser life, it's often a better one. I've talked to a lot of people who've made this mental shift, and the common thread is, I wish I'd done it earlier. Nobody says I wish I'd bought more stuff. Step 4, I would build a liquidity buffer and then stop. 3 to 6 months of expenses in a high yield savings account, not more. Everything above that threshold goes into investments. The temptation for cautious people is to keep too much cash because cash feels safe. Cash is not safe in an inflationary environment. Cash is losing purchasing power willpower every year it sits there. Safety is building a portfolio that can survive volatility, not a pile of cash that can't. Step 5. I would treat every raise and bonus as an investment event, not a lifestyle upgrade event. This is where most people make the fatal mistake. Income goes up $10,000. Lifestyle expands $10,000. Net financial position stays identical. The people who build wealth treat raises differently. They keep lifestyle mostly flat and redirect the raise delta into investments. They practice what Morgan Housel calls saving the raise. It's not glamorous, but it's the difference between lifestyle creep and compound growth. Let me tell you about something that actually happens in practice and almost nobody talks about. There's a specific moment in middle-class life that I call the lifestyle lock-in. It usually happens somewhere in the late 20s to mid 30s. You get a decent job. You sign a lease on a nicer apartment because you can now afford it. You upgrade the car because you've earned it. You start going to the restaurants your colleagues go to. And suddenly your cost structure has scaled up to match your income. And here's the trap. Once you're locked in, getting out is psychologically brutal. Because now giving up the apartment or the car doesn't feel like optimizing. It feels like going backwards. It feels like failure. It feels like admitting you can't afford your life. So people stay locked in. They let lifestyle inflation set a floor below which they cannot seem to drop. And that floor keeps rising as income rises because the upgrade itch gets scratched every time there's a raise. The people who avoid this trap either lock in their lifestyle deliberately early at a level significantly below their income, or they never let it lock in the first place by consistently delaying the lifestyle upgrade until the investment habit is so deeply entrenched that it's non-negotiable. Here's a real example. A guy I know in tech makes $140,000, has made at least $120,000 for 6 years, still lives in the same apartment he moved into at $95,000, still drives the same car. His colleagues think he's either cheap or struggling. They don't know which. He's actually sitting on $580,000 in investments at 34 years old. In 6 years of disciplined not upgrading, he's built more real wealth than most people accumulate in a lifetime. Is his life worse than his colleagues? In some visible surface level way, yes. His apartment is smaller, his car is older. But in every way that actually matters to long-term human well-being, security, options, autonomy, the ability to say no to things he doesn't want to do, his life is dramatically better. He told me once, "The thing I notice most is that I stopped being afraid. I used to have low-grade financial anxiety all the time. Now I don't. That's not nothing. That might be everything." Here's the part that makes the middle-class trap so particularly cruel. The people inside it are often working incredibly hard. They're not lazy. They're not irresponsible by any conventional measure. They're just stuck in a system that extracts the output of their effort in ways that are invisible, normalized, and relentless. The convenience premium extracts from their schedule. The credential trap extracts from their income. The identity consumption loop extracts from their discretionary spending. And by the time there's any surplus, it disappears into something else that seemed reasonable at the time. And then they're 55, good job, good person, genuinely worked hard their whole life, and they look at the retirement calculator and the number makes them sick. Not because they did anything wrong, but because they played the game they were given without ever questioning whether the game was designed for them to win. It wasn't. The game was designed for you to generate maximum economic activity and pay maximum fees and buy maximum products and retire just comfortable enough not to riot but not free enough to stop needing the system. Understanding that is not cynicism, it's clarity. Because once you see the game clearly, you can decide whether to play it differently. You can decide to opt out of the consumption identity loop. You can decide to automate before you spend. You can decide that your version of a good life doesn't require the props the consumer economy has convinced you are necessary. And that decision made clearly and early is the most financially consequential thing you will ever do. More than any stock pick, more than any raise, more than any inheritance. It's the decision to let compound interest do its job instead of redirecting its output into a lifestyle that looks good but accumulates nothing. The math is not complicated. Earn a reasonable income. Spend significantly less than you earn. Invest the difference consistently in boring index funds. Don't touch it for decades. That formula, executed for 30 years, produces financial freedom for almost anyone with a middle-class income. The complication isn't the math. The complication is doing it in a culture that makes spending feel like success and saving feel like deprivation. The complication is maintaining that behavior through your 30s and 40s while every social signal tells you to upgrade, reward yourself, live a little. The complication is watching colleagues and friends buy things you're not buying and telling yourself the story that the Honda is fine and the modest apartment is fine and fine is not failure. The complication is recognizing that temporary comfort is not the same as long-term freedom and that you're making that trade every single month whether you're conscious of it or not. So here are your 3 actual takeaways, not the generic ones, the real ones. First, the middle-class trap is not about the lattes. It's about the 3 structural leaks, convenience premium, credential trap, and identity consumption loop that quietly drain financial capacity from people who are working hard and still not getting ahead. Identify which one is hitting you hardest. That's where the real leverage is. Second, the advice to budget better treats this as a knowledge problem. It's not. It's an environment and identity problem. Build systems that remove willpower from the equation. Automate investment before spending. Engineer friction into consumption. And do the harder work of figuring out who you actually are outside the things you own. Because that identity work is the foundation that everything else rests on. Third, the most expensive thing you will ever buy is the time you spend not investing. Every year you delay, every dollar that goes to signaling instead of compounding closes closes the window on what's possible. Not because you're running out of time, but because compound interest rewards time above everything else, and you only get one shot at the years you're living right now. The middle class trap is real. It's structural, it's getting worse, and the exit isn't through working harder inside the trap. It's through understanding the trap clearly enough to stop walking in circles and start moving toward the exit, which it turns out is always in the same direction. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference. Wait, that's it. That's the whole formula. The reason so few people execute it isn't because it's complicated. It's because everything around them is designed to make it feel impossible.